Record better audio anywhere with Motive digital microphones from Shure. Easy-to-use options like the MV88 plug directly into your phone or computer and include a free app. Create studio-quality sound for podcasts, music, and videos. Visit Shure.com to learn more.
Blog Talk Radio.
Off the Chain. I'm your host, Yvonne Mason, and that was Please Stay by my nephew, Mark Stokes. He wrote and performed that song, so look him up and give him a listen. He is on the move. Tonight's show is a little bit different from some of the shows that we've done in the past, as was last Thursday night's show. Tonight, I'm going to call her a very dear friend because I feel like that she and I have known each other for a long, long, long time. Her name is Wanda Luthman. She is an author, and I had her on a couple of weeks ago, and we discussed her books. But tonight we're going to discuss something different. But let me tell you a little bit about Wanda first. she is an author. She writes adult books as well as children's books. So look her up and check her out and buy her books. In fact, 2 of her children's books, she just told me before the show, 2 indie bookstores reached out to her, and now her books are sitting on their shelves and flying off their shelves. So congratulations on that. This show is a special show that we decided to do because of the holidays, and it is something that's not discussed openly enough. The topic of the show is grief. No, Wanda and I are not going to tell you how to deal with grief. No, we're not going to tell you there is a timeline. And no, we're not going to tell you to get over it. Grief is a very personal emotion. And anyone who says they've never had to deal with grief, well, they're not being truthful. They're not being truthful to themselves, and they're not being truthful to others. Grief is not just about a death. It can be a loss of a job, a move to a new place, a loss of a home. It comes in many events in our lives. And children, ladies and gentlemen, children especially have a hard time dealing with grief because this is an emotion they cannot explain, nor can they express it. Adults tend to think that children do not grieve, but they do. So sit with us for an hour, learn things. Hello, my dear. How are you tonight?
Hello, Yvonne. I'm very well, thank you.
So let's just jump right in with both feet. I thought that song by my nephew was very, very appropriate because
Me too. That's beautiful.
Isn't it gorgeous? He talks about grief without actually saying the words. He's begging someone to stay and not to leave. And we find ourselves doing that and not realizing it. It could be the end of a relationship. It could be a death. Like I said, it could be a move to a new place, loss of a job, loss of a home, loss of a car, loss of even a beloved pet, loss of anything. So let's tell the audience, what is grief? What would Webster tell us that grief is?
Well, I don't know. I haven't looked it up in Webster, but my thoughts on grief is that it's an emotion, but it's also a process that you go through of dealing with loss, in whatever form that may be. Like you said, we most often think of it with death, but it can be other sorts of losses. Like you said, a move, losing a job, a relationship, a pet, those other losses that happen in our lives.
And would it be fair to say that there are several stages of grief that the mind and the body go through in order for the mind, the body, and the soul and the psychic to process it and then to be able to heal and move forward?
Absolutely. A very famous psychotherapist, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, had studied actually people themselves who were facing their own death, like in a hospital where they knew they were going to die, and she studied the stages they went through as they faced their own death. And so she wrote a book called, The 5 Stages of Death. Well, as it turned out, as more studies went on, when people go through a grief or a loss, that they grieve in that same way, whether you're grieving your own life, going towards death, or grieving the loss of someone else or something else. And so, yes, there are definitely stages. What sort of happened around that is that some therapists would talk about the stages and not maybe explain that the stages are not necessarily what you call discrete. You don't move from one stage and then that one's over and you go to the next one and then that one's over. Typically when people grieve, they flow back and forth through those stages, many times. And so they're not like sequential. You can't say, you're going to start here and you're going to end here and it's going to go boom, boom, boom. You may start here and then go to the next stage and then come back to the first stage, And so people kind of got a little bit. Go ahead.
No two people grieve the same at the same stage at the same time either, correct?
Process grief so differently because their relationship with whatever was lost is different, than the next person. And, how they even feel their emotions and express their emotions is going to be different. And so everybody grieves differently and in a different speed, so to speak. Some people may come to a place of acceptance and peace quicker than others. And, we need to be patient with each other and understand that just because this person is angry and this person is peaceful and this person is sad doesn't mean anybody loves whoever was lost, less than,
It's just the processing of that human emotion is different for everyone. Now, would it be safe to say that we all go through the first stage immediately, and that is shock?
Right. That's the first thing. I mean, it's a defense mechanism. It helps you, it's just a natural reaction to things that are shocking, to news that is shocking. If you would not have that buffer, you wouldn't be able to cope at all. And so everybody definitely goes through that first stage of shock and denial, to sort of help you buffer those severe, intense emotions.
And if getting in depth to that a little bit more, it's like, I see it like, for instance, if you have a car wreck or something traumatic happens to you, you don't immediately understand what happened. You know something happened, but you cannot process exactly what happened because it's absolutely too much for the mind to process immediately. It's like a computer that's fixing to short circuit because it's on overload. Would that be a fair statement?
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. It would be overload if you were able to completely understand it the minute that it happened. It's just way too traumatic. So, yes, that's sort of the natural buffering that goes on there to kind of protect you and help you process it a little bit more slower, take it in bits,
So we go into what I would call autopilot. We do what is necessary to get us from point A to point B and through the physical movements that we have to do, and then it's like the mind and the body says, okay, I'm shutting down now for a while because I have to reboot slowly.
Right. Yeah, I think, like initially when there's death and there are steps you have to do, you have to go through those steps of making decisions about, the burial and the funeral service and whatever, all the different plans and arrangements. People often walk through that in a very numb state, just going through the steps and the next thing and the next thing, and it's only later. And often it's after the funeral and after everyone has left that people start to actually feel their emotions. And that's sometimes when they need way more support than initially, which kind of goes against what we think.
They need to be surrounded by others who they can commiserate with, but then they don't need things like it will take time to get over it, or you haven't gotten over it yet, or they are in a better place, or the pain will go away. Or some people are even afraid to bring up the deceased's name because they're afraid it will hurt. But on the flip side of that, the person that's hurting needs to talk about those memories because that's what they have left to help them heal.
Right. I think people get real awkward around death, and like you said, they don't know what to say, so they say a lot of things that are annoying or, even what do I want to say, like destructive,
Right.
like they're in a better place or God wanted another angel or something like that. That is, nothing about that is what, somebody needs to hear when they've lost somebody. Mainly, they need somebody who will listen, because the person who has lost somebody, they need to talk about that person and talk about their memories, and they need good listeners, people who can just be there and sit with them in their grief.
And I'm going back to the loss that we suffered last year. I lost my dad, and my mother lost her husband. They've been married for 66 years. She loved him since she was 13 years old. So for a solid year, Wanda, my darling mother would call me every morning before I even had coffee. My own children don't even call me before I had coffee. And it was like it was a loop, because it was constantly, she was talking about the same thing over and over and over, and it was like a loop on a record player that never changed.
Yeah.
And she didn't realize half of the things that she was repeating over and over, but she did it for a solid year.
Yeah.
And that was all part of the grief process.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, to people who don't understand that, they might get frustrated and annoyed at, like, why are you repeating yourself? But the way to heal really does take that loop, like you said. They come back to it and back to it and back to it, and that's okay. That's a way for her to process and make sense of her life, that lifelong partner who's now no longer with her.
And that brings us to one of the things that we really wanted to talk about, because not only, of course, and I told you this earlier, did I not lose my father, but 6 weeks earlier I lost my 13-year-old granddaughter who has siblings. One is younger and one is older. And she has an even older brother, 3 older brothers. But the younger one started acting out because he and her were very, very close. Well, what I told his mother was this: he's acting out because he doesn't understand the pain. And he doesn't think he's supposed to feel the pain, because everybody is, for lack of a better phrase, and this is another one that I hate, but it's the best way to explain it, the rest of the family was moving forward with their life, and he was still stuck in phase 1, trying to process why his sister died in front of him in their living room.
Yeah, I think with children, when they grieve, they don't have the words for it. They don't have, and not that adults always do either, but they don't have a way to comprehend and understand it. So they do typically act out. And it can, by acting out, it doesn't always mean they go and be bad, although that can happen. They can be mad. They can be sad and withdrawn. And all those things are just different phases of grief. And it sounds like in his case, he did have so much pain, and he couldn't verbalize it. So he acted it out, and expressed his anger. And and he could have even felt some anger about the fact that, like you said, people in the family appeared to be moving on, and maybe he felt like letting her go, and he wasn't there and didn't want to do that and didn't understand that, and so it made him angry.
And he didn't understand that because the family as a whole was trying to move forward. They weren't forgetting her. In fact, they remember her daily, but in order to begin the healing process, not that the hole will ever go away that's in their heart. I mean, God knows that hole's going to stay there forever. I feel it every day. But if we don't move forward with our lives, we stand still and we actually dishonor their life, their time with us. We bring dishonor to that part of our life that we had with them.
Right. And that sort of moving on with your life can feel like to some people, like maybe the boy, that people were forgetting her or putting her behind them or something, and he didn't understand that. But like you said, it is a way to if you got stuck there and you didn't move on with your life, it wouldn't honor her. That's not the best use, of your life now at this point. And so I like that's really poignant to understand that, sometimes difficult though to actually do,
And I think as adults, when it comes to children, it is our responsibility, even though we're hurting, it is our responsibility to help that we would understand that it's okay to be angry, it's okay to be sad, it's okay to hurt, it's also okay to remember, it's okay to cry, and it's okay to feel lost. All of those are normal reactions, and it's okay if they want to feel that way. And sometimes I don't think children understand, and adults discount. Well, what are you crying for? I don't know. Well, stop. But yet we break out in tears, and we don't know why we're crying, but we are allowed to cry and they are not. That's not quite right.
Right. It is so hard when you yourself are grieving to have to also help children grieve. That's a part that's really difficult for parents. And, I was a part of hospice for over 10 years, working with teens who had lost a loved one. And there were younger children too, but I worked with the teen group. And really the parents needed their own support group, and the kids needed their own support group, so that everybody in the family was getting supported through that process. Because the parents need support, it's difficult for them to also be giving support. So it's really good to remember to reach out to the community services that are available, whether it's hospice or a counseling center or a support group, to help everybody in the family process, and not just have it be where the parents are, maybe they're so lost in their grief they can't even deal or even recognize their child's grief to help them through. And so I think it is important to get that additional help.
And speaking of support groups, if a child is school age or preschool age or even goes to daycare, would it also be a valuable tool to reach out to the daycare, the preschool, the schools, and say, okay, we've suffered this loss, and we need your help to help this child and to understand that there may be days when he or she is going to act out of their normal character, but it's not because they've all of a sudden decided they're going to be the meanest kid on the block, but it's because they're hurting. And when you see that this is beginning to happen, take a minute to take them aside and speak with them. Let them tell you what they think they're feeling, and don't discount it, because that's another thing. We discount a child's feelings like it's not important.
Right. That is so important about communicating with the daycares and the school and whoever your child might be involved with, because if the school doesn't know that they've suffered this loss, they won't understand the child's behavior and why this is going on, and then they're just getting the child in trouble, and, that just compounds things. So it is really important to communicate with those other parties and let them know so that they can be supportive and be a part of the healing process. I'm glad you brought that up. That's very important.
Well, and let's take it a step further, especially in schools, because, you've got the different dynamics in schools. You got the bully factor, you got the cliques, you got all these kids and all these different dynamics. Would it be fair and or advisable to let the classroom know that this child, their classmate, needs their help because this child has suffered a severe loss, and there may be some days when they're sad or some days when they're angry and lash out for no reason, but it's up to us as a unit to reach out to them and let them know that we're there for them, and let them know that we have their back and they've got a shoulder.
I think that is so wonderful. If the class can be part of the healing process, bring them in to say, here's a classmate who's had a loss, and this is how, you need to respond to them, because children aren't always going to know how to respond to other children, and so that is something that can be handled and taught in the classroom, because often what happens is that child who's had a loss feels so alone and so different from everybody else in the class, because they feel like they're the only one who's gone through anything like that. And they may be, but they may not be. And
exactly.
to help other classmates learn how to be compassionate and show compassion and caring, and that to share, that sometimes, like, let's say a child has lost a mom, and then the other children don't want to talk about their own mom, or like they talk about their own mom and they go, oh, I'm sorry, and that just compounds the awkwardness. And so I think, using those as teachable moments are just fabulous. It helps both sides, the grieving party and then the people that are trying to be supportive and don't really know how.
And you just brought up a good point where a child talks about their mom. There are triggers that will bring on an onset of visible grief, and we don't always know, and this is for adult or child alike, and it could be something completely innocent, like a child talking about their mom, or listening to a song, or a favorite smell, or a favorite food dish. But there are triggers, and those triggers are okay to feel the effects.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, I mean, it is more important to go ahead and allow yourself that moment of feeling the sadness and feeling that loss, with whatever trigger, as opposed to trying to push it down or ignore it or, not feel it. I mean, the best thing to do to heal is to feel your feelings, as uncomfortable as they may be. That is the best thing to do. So just embrace it in that moment of that trigger and reliving the loss and process through that,
And that brings up another thing that is a misconception in our society. And I'm not so sure that the Victorian era didn't have it right. They spent a year grieving.
Mhm.
And we don't. We as soon as the body's in the ground or in the vault or the ashes are put in the bottle, we shut that door.
Mhm.
And we, on some level, pretend it didn't happen.
Mhm.
Or we say, well, we'll think about it later. But we don't understand there's no timetable for this grief then healing process. And it could be 20 years down the road. It's going to jump up and slap us in the face if we don't deal with it in the moment. Would that be a correct statement?
That would be a correct statement. And, I think you're right that in our society we're uncomfortable talking about death, and in other societies they deal with death differently and a little bit more openly, and they do allow the grieving process to be something that goes on longer than, the funeral service. And you're right, like having a year to grieve would be amazing if our, community would really give that to one another. But even at a year, sometimes people will go, oh, okay, she's still grieving, but then at a year, they're ready to be done. They don't want to hear you talk about whoever anymore. We're done listening to that. And like you said, grief can go on, sometimes kind of, like you said, buried and then pop back up, but even it could go on in a very intense way for several years. And especially for children who are going through different developmental stages. They may have lost a sibling or a parent or a grandparent they were close to, and then come, a different milestone in their life, and they wish that sibling or parent or grandparent was there for that milestone, and they re-grieve it all over again. And so, yes, it can pop up again and again throughout your life.
And when it does pop up, to one of my favorite words, to poo-poo it as, well, you should already be over it by now, to me is like opening up that wound even further and stabbing me with a hot poker, because irregardless of what quote-unquote society feels, we never get over that loss, ever, never, because you can't, it's not like going and replacing a broken chair, which still would not be the same chair. It would be a different chair. Even if it were the same make and model, it would still be a different chair. You can't replace that person in your life, and you can't replace what you will never have because of that loss.
I mean, that is so true, and those are the most hurtful words and most insensitive words to ever say. You should be over it. There is no getting over the loss of somebody that you have loved that much and that intensely and that close to you that you're never going to be, quote, over it. And so people need to stop saying that and realize that that's not a truth about grief, and realize that people grieve throughout their life for those people. And so that needs to get out of people's vocabulary. There's no getting over it.
And another one of my non-favorite sayings is, without fail. And when we were doing the baby's obituary at the funeral home, it was in her obituary, and I wanted to, if I had had my right mind about me, I would have said, don't put that in there. Word it some other way. Where the funeral home obituary says, survivors include. Well, you don't feel like a survivor. You feel like you're dead inside. You don't want to be a survivor. I had a real good friend of mine, when her husband died, she read the obit and it says survivors include, and she said, I'm not a survivor. I don't want to be a survivor. I want to be with him. So I think we need to find another word as opposed to, it wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't a plane crash. It wasn't a car wreck. It was a death. They left us. Right.
It is a weird term there to say survivor, like you were all in a tragedy and these are the ones that happen to survive the tragedy. No, you're just still alive, you know.
Right.
So that we need to find a different word in a different way to say that, family members include or whatever,
Or loved ones left behind. Anything besides survival.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot more sense to say loved ones left behind. We
didn't survive anything. We're part of the casualties.
That's right.
If they want to say some casualties include, or broken-hearted family members, or collateral damage.
Right.
Or even collateral damage, because you think about it, we are collateral damage. We've been bombarded with a bomb of death, and we became collateral damage.
Yeah, that is very true.
There are injuries, some of them severe, most of them severe. Some may not survive the collateral damage, but survivors include? Really, people?
Yeah. What were they thinking with that one?
They must have been on some serious drugs.
I know it.
Let's talk a little bit about, because we've talked all around the stages of grief, but we haven't talked about the actual name for those stages. The first one is shock. We all go through that at that moment.
Right.
When we get that phone call or we see it happen in person or we're there with that person, the body protects itself. It says, okay, I'm putting you in shock. You're going to go on autopilot and you're going to do what's got to be done. But right now I'm shutting you down because you mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally will not be able to do the things that need to be done to get through this tunnel.
Right.
So after that, and ladies and gentlemen, these stages can come, it's like Wanda said, they come in different ways for different people, and you bounce back and forth. So let the listening audience know the other stages so that someone who's grieving can say, you know, I feel that way. I understand this now, and it's okay.
So usually there's like the shock and denial kind of, you know, no, that didn't happen, no kind of initial response. And then there's usually a sadness. That's when we start crying and it's starting to make it into our brain that there is an actual loss, and we feel very sad over that. And then usually it turns into anger. And we feel very angry, like, why did this happen? And, you know, we might be angry at if it was an accident, you know, the other person involved or other people involved or whatnot, or angry at God, or angry even at the person who died, like, you know, why did they leave me? And there can be anger towards yourself, like, oh, if maybe I hadn't have said this or that, this would have never happened, or if only, you know, I had said I was sorry or told them I love them. You know, there's all those complicated feelings that can come and cause the anger. And the other stage, which is one that doesn't make a lot of sense when somebody's already passed, because this stage was more for the person who was facing their own death, was the bargaining stage, where you bargain with God. Well, if you let me live, I promise I'll do X, Y, and Z. And so that one doesn't exactly make sense when somebody's already passed, but people still go through a bit of that, you know, wishing for the person to come back, even though you know it can't happen. There's still that phase in there. And people, those stages are very fluid. You might feel angry one day and sad the next day, and going back and forth and or even, you know, in the next moment, you know. So they're not, like I said before, not discrete stages, and it doesn't have to be go through one and then the next one and then the next one, then I'm done. You know, you can process back through them several times, and then usually there is a level of acceptance. And by acceptance, it doesn't mean you now feel, you know, nothing anymore about the loss. It's sort of that you gather up your life and you move on, knowing that this person is not going to be moving on with you. You know, you have to leave them in the past, and you come to some sort of like understanding, like, yes, this is how this is, and you move forward. But the loss can still be there, the sadness can still be there, and occasionally the anger can still be there. And there can be a host of other emotions too. A lot of people have guilt, shame, some other emotions that can come in to the process.
And would it be fair to say that sometimes the guilt is, I'm still here, I'm moving on, and they're not. Why am I still here?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that retards the ability to move forward with one's life, because we get so stuck in the guilt phase or even the denial phase that we can't do anything for the future. We're still stuck way back here. And then we dishonor that loved one.
yeah, I think that, guilt and shame about enjoying life after a loss can really play havoc with people. They might be laughing about something and then suddenly realize, I shouldn't be laughing. I should feel sad. I do feel sad, and they sort of feel bad that they had forgotten for a moment their loss and had enjoyed life again for a moment. And yes, that can play majorly into your emotions of shame and guilt that you're still alive and you're moving on and you're enjoying life and you feel like you shouldn't. And that's a piece of the grief too, and trying to understand that you are still alive and you still need to embrace life and live life to the fullest. And that doesn't mean that you don't feel that loss or didn't care that the person left. None of that means that because you've enjoyed life again. It doesn't take away from the love and the loss that you've experienced, but it's very difficult on people to.
It's almost like It's almost like they commit emotional blackmail to themselves.
Yeah.
And what they
don't
understand is that person is probably standing on their shoulder going, go ahead, do it for both of us. Just because I'm not here doesn't mean you can't do it for both of us and enjoy it for both of us, and you'll have double enjoyment, and that's okay.
Mhm. That is okay. It is very much okay. And important. Go ahead and live your life and be happy. You do not have to, wear a sackcloth the rest of your life and be in drudgery and sadness. And that doesn't mean you don't feel those things, but you don't have to stay there. You can go ahead and embrace life and live life again.
For one thing, it's not healthy to stay there.
Mm-mm.
It creates all kinds of emotional and mental breakdowns that then can lead to suicide, which is a very selfish act because you're not taking yourself out of the problem. You're creating a bigger problem for those that you leave behind.
Right, and I think sometimes that people do think suicide is the only option because they don't see another way out of the pain. And that's when those support groups and a professional can really help those people feel their emotions and process their thoughts and feelings so that they realize they're not alone. And
death, this is how I explained it to my daughter. I said, death is as natural an act and as much a part of life as living. That's the way my father explained it to me, because he and I talked about death a lot before he died. And he said, Yvonne, death is as much part of life as living. It is something that we all have to face sooner or later. None of us get out alive. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And yes, sadly, some we think are taken way too soon. We want them longer, but that's not up to us. And we have to learn to be, I don't want to say okay with it because it sounds kind of crass, but we have to learn to be accepting of it.
Yeah. I agree. I think sort of embracing that whole, circle of life, that this is just a part of it, and embracing that process that is life and death, and sort of accepting that whole circle is much more healthy than sort of giving up and just feeling sad and shameful about living life.
And I think we cheat our children. My children have always gone to funerals and to funeral homes because death has been over my shoulder since I was a little girl, and I was always taken to funerals and funeral homes because that's the part of the country I was from. But we cheat our children. In fact, they brought my grandfather home. They brought my cousin home because they were in the country, and that's what you did. And so it was easier to accept. They weren't off in a sterile funeral home somewhere. But we cheat our children when we don't expose them to that part of life. When we say, oh, they can't handle it. It's too much for them. Well, not really. It's like
I wholeheartedly agree.
It's a learning experience of life that they're going to have to learn to deal with at some point, if not someone they love, then their own mortality.
Right. And I do think the way our society deals with death is sort of pushed off into a room in a different building and then, like you said, separated from life. And we do a disservice to all of us, including children, but keeping children away from funeral homes and funerals definitely keeps them confused about, well, what happened to Grandma? Where is she now? And, and using the term she fell asleep or something that doesn't say death, then they become afraid of falling asleep. That's not good. You need to call it what it is and let them see it. I believe children should, I don't think you should force it. There's some times when it's not really maybe appropriate, and if children don't want to go touch Grandma in the casket, that's okay,
But
I don't think you have to force anything. But they need to go and be part of it.
Right. I call it embracing it, but they need to understand that we all wind up in that place at some point down in our road. We all going to be there. And in order to give children a three-dimensional view of life, we need to be honest with them. Yes, Grandma died. She's been sick for a long time. She died. Now we're going to the funeral home and pay our respects. You don't have to go up to the casket. You don't have to touch her. You don't have to kiss her. But you have to go and be with the family and be part of the grief.
Yeah, absolutely. So important. So important.
So the last few minutes that we have, let's talk about, if you will, well, before that, what other wonderful thoughts have you got for with grief?
Well, I was sort of going down that road where we were talking about exposing children to it, that other cultures do embrace death in a lot more open way. And so whatever we can do to make it more normal and natural and an embraced part of life is healthier for all of us, children and adults alike. And, I hadn't, seen, I went to my uncle's funeral when I was 14, and he had died tragically in an accident. And I don't know what I thought I would see, in the casket, but he looked fine, and that was I was 14 before I saw, basically a dead body, and, trying to process that. Well, he looks fine. How come is he not here? And I just think we need to talk about death, not in a morbid way, but in an open way with our children and with each other, so that it's an awkward conversation, but it doesn't have to be. The more we become comfortable talking about it, and if you don't know what to say to somebody, that's okay. You can say, I don't really know what you need to hear from me right now. I don't know what the right thing is, but I'm here for you. I love you. I want to talk to you about whatever you want to talk about. You can make yourself available to people and take the awkwardness out of it and open yourself up to your friends and family that are grieving so that people don't feel alone. I think that's the worst thing when you've lost somebody, is to feel alone in your grief. And we just need to reach out and bridge that gap, even if we feel uncomfortable and we don't know what to say. I think it's really important that we just suck it up and reach across to our friends and family and say, I'm here for you.
Now, we got about 5 minutes left, so let's grief counseling, that is very, very, very important. We touched on it earlier, but explain to our audience why it is so important for grief counseling.
Well, what I experienced when I worked at hospice with teens, the biggest piece was the alone piece that I was explaining earlier. And, teens don't like to feel different, and they don't want to stand out. And so if they don't have a safe place where they can go and talk, they don't process it well anyway. They're trying to pull away and establish their own identity. And when they've lost a family member, they kind of want to pull in to the family to be closer for healing, but it's a conflict for them. And so it's just a very difficult stage. And so when we would pull them into group and they could be with other teens who'd lost a loved one, it was a safe place where they could talk and they knew they would be understood and loved and embraced. And that's what's really, really important about groups, and just have support as you're going through that process and realize you're not alone and that it is a process and, that there is help. Individual, one-on-one counseling can be really important if you lost somebody and maybe the relationship wasn't a good one and, your grief is more complicated because you have maybe much more overlay of guilt and shame and some other things that maybe weren't resolved while the person was alive, and you need a professional to really help you process those things on top of your grief. And so I just really encourage people to reach out to the services that are available in your community. Hospice runs groups. They also do individual. They've always been free that I know of, so you shouldn't have to pay for those services. And then there's, your local mental health centers and other psychiatrists and counselors and professionals that can help you one-on-one if you need that sort of processing too.
And the main thing is not to let grief own you. You own the grief.
Mm-hmm.
Because when the grief owns you, then you don't have the capability of moving forward.
Mhm. I think that's really true, and I think that's a piece of sort of educating yourself and why the stages, kind of understanding that there are stages and this is a normal, because it feels so chaotic that to sort of break it down into stages and realize that this is all normal helps you gain that control over your grief as opposed to it controlling you. And so educating yourself, there's lots of wonderful books out there, seeking professional help, seeking others who've lost a loved one. All of those things can really help you in the process so that you are not owned by your grief. You're owning it.
And to understand that it will, the blast, the nuclear blast of the grief will abate. You will One will always have that moment of loss and of grief, but that overwhelming grief that hits you in the beginning that one has to work through, it will eventually fade to I call it a dull thud.
Yeah,
but
that's very true. To help you see that there's light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, that there is a process that can help process through these very, very intense traumatic emotions to bring you out to a place where you can cope and live your life and sort of reorganize yourself around the loss.
And not feel guilty doing it.
Absolutely.
Because I think that is the to me, from the people that I've been around. In fact, I've got a girlfriend that still, after all these years, she still carries this guilt around this. Well, what if I had done this, or what if I had done that, or what if I had said this? And I'm saying to her, you can't go back, and number two, you can't second guess life because it is what it is. You have to just say it happened, and let's deal with this moment and move forward. I'm not saying let go. And I'm not saying forget about your husband. Her son was killed in Iraq after her husband had died the year earlier. I'm saying you don't forget about those people because that you love them. But you've got to understand that it's not your fault they died.
Right.
And we forget that
can
sometimes.
be a piece of it. We do. Yeah. We think, well, sometimes you get mad at somebody and you say, I just wish you would die or something, and then sometimes that has happened, and then people feel so guilty, like, well, I shouldn't have said that, and we shouldn't say those sort of things, but that doesn't mean that's why they passed, and so, yeah, we really do. That's a process of that shame and guilt that I was talking about earlier, that to process through that and understand you are not responsible for this person's death.
It's part of life. It is a natural progression. And some of us are fortunate enough to live long lives, and some of us are fortunate enough to, stay on this earth a little bit longer. And some of us are taken earlier. It's just the natural progression of life. And life doesn't even have a timetable either. It is fleeting.
Yes.
So in retrospect, I would say that while we are on this journey, that we be the best that we can be at what we do.
Absolutely. Yep. And engage in life and live in the moment, live it to the fullest, be the best people we can be. Embrace that. Embrace life and embrace death.
Which is a natural progression. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Off the Chain, and with your host, Yvonne Mason, and my beautiful friend Wanda Luthman and I, who is also a wonderful author, have been talking about grief. We sincerely hope that we have helped you, and if there's any one of you out there that is grieving and thinks it's the end of the road, it isn't, seek help. As Wanda says, seek counseling, because grief is a normal human emotion. There are different stages. If you have children who are grieving, get counseling for them. Be patient with them. Be patient with yourself. Tomorrow night, I will have author Sherry Rensler, who is launching her new book, Breaking the Glass Slipper. So join me at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Wanda, thank you, my dear, dear friend. This has been a very enlightening and actually uplifting show. I know some people would say Yvonne's lost, but I don't think so. I think that it's been very uplifting. It hasn't been morbid. It hasn't been depressing. It's been educational. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I absolutely would. Thank you so much for having me, Yvonne. It's been great to be here. And to all the listeners out there, if you are hurting or grieving, know that you're not alone. It's a normal process, and to get help and support.
And ladies and gentlemen, understand that be your best friend. Right, Wanda?
Yes, be your best friend. Take care of yourself.
And as she said, take care of yourself, love yourself, like yourself, live your dream, and know that no one can steal your happiness or your dreams or your goals without your permission. So join me again tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern with author Sherry Rensler. And again, my dear friend Wanda, thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank you, Yvonne. It was great to be here.
And we will talk later. I will send you this show as soon as it goes up into archives. And you're coming back to talk about your new books when they start coming out.
Okay, awesome. I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right, my darling. Talk later.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Record better audio anywhere with Motive Digital Microphones from Shure. Easy-to-use options like the MV88 plug directly into your phone or computer and include a free app. Create studio-quality sound for podcasts, music, and videos. Visit Shure.com to learn more.
Danny, I just figured out that if I switch to Metro PCS, I get 2 Samsung Galaxy phones free.
Cool, Dad.
And I could be a super dad with 2 free Samsung Galaxy phones and call myself Double Galaxy Man.
Or you could give the second phone to your sidekick.
Yeah, I guess I could do that.
That's right. 2 free Samsung Galaxy On 5 smartphones are all yours when you switch to Metro PCS. Metro PCS. Wireless figured out. Coverage not available in some areas. Sales tax not included in phone price. Excludes numbers on the T-Mobile network. See store for details and terms and conditions.